About 15 years ago, I had one of the scariest nights of my childhood, and it all started out as something that was supposed to be fun. My parents had let me invite over two of my closest friends, Audrey and May, for a backyard campout. We were around 12 at the time, and sleeping outside in a tent without adults felt like the biggest adventure in the world. My parents had made sure it would feel like a real campout. My mom bought us snacks, chips, cookies, candy, and even marshmallows for s'mores, while my dad ordered a big pizza and drinks before they left for their own dinner plans. The three of us were so excited. We dragged most of the food outside into the tent, even though my mom told us to leave some of it inside because ants would come. We didn't care. We were laughing, talking about school, our summer plans, and whispering about crushes like kids do. It was one of those warm summer nights where the air was still, the crickets were already out, and it smelled faintly like cut grass from earlier that day. We started off strong, trying to follow the schedule we had made for the night. Scary stories, s'mores, and staying up as late as we could. After we finished as much pizza as our stomachs could handle, we laid out blankets and pillows inside the tent, trying to build some kind of pillow fort. Kept collapsing on us, which only made us laugh harder. In between all of that, though, I started noticing something that pulled me out of the fun. Every so often, it sounded like there was movement outside the tent. Not footsteps exactly, just small noises, like someone brushing past or shifting in the grass. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. The tent fabric made every sound from outside feel louder, and when you're 12 years old, every little noise feels suspicious. I finally leaned over and unzipped the mesh window to look out. The yard was still. The light from the back porch gave enough glow that I could see the outline of the fence, my dad's grill, and the trees swaying gently beyond the yard. Nothing looked off. I zipped the window back up and told myself to stop being paranoid. 5 minutes later, May suddenly asked if we'd heard something brushing against the side of the tent. Audrey immediately leaned over to the same mesh window I had looked through and squinted into the yard. Then she froze. In a low voice, she told us she thought she saw something black moving near the fence. I looked too, and at first, I didn't see a shape, just darkness blending together. Then a flash of white caught my eye. It was the swoosh of a Nike shoe, reflecting the porch light for just a split second. I screamed without meaning to, and both of my friends screamed with me. We bolted out of the tent and ran straight inside the house, not even caring about leaving everything behind. The three of us locked ourselves in the downstairs bathroom. We were panicked, shaking, and trying not to cry. We pressed our ears against the door, and then we heard footsteps. A second later, the doorknob rattled like someone was trying to come in. We all started screaming again. Audrey grabbed her phone, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped it, and called 911. While she was on the phone, we just kept yelling until we suddenly heard my mom's voice telling us to come out. We opened the door slowly, and my parents were standing there. My dad looked guilty, and before we could even say anything, he told us he had been the one outside messing around. He had wanted to scare us as a joke. He even admitted to rattling the bathroom door. He ended up taking the phone from Audrey and apologizing to the dispatcher. We were angry, angrier than I think my dad expected. But he was a jokester, always pulling little pranks, and after some time we calmed down. He felt bad about it and offered to get the fire pit going in the backyard. He put on some light music, helped us roast marshmallows, and tried to make it up to us. After a while, the tension eased, and it almost felt like a normal sleepover again. By midnight, we were exhausted. We crawled back into the tent, still buzzing from all the sugar and adrenaline. We whispered in the dark for a while before one by one, everyone began to fall asleep. I was the last one awake, lying there listening to my friends breathing, making sure they were comfortable. The crickets outside had become the background noise, and I finally started to let myself drift. That's when I woke up suddenly. It was pitch black inside the tent, the only light being faint from the moon through the thin fabric. At first, I didn't know why I had woken up, but then I heard it, the heavy sound of breathing. It wasn't soft like my friend's breathing had been earlier. It was heavier, slower, almost like a snore but deeper. I sat up, blinking, trying to adjust my eyes. I thought maybe one of my friends was just snoring loudly, but it didn't sound right. I turned toward the mesh window again, and my stomach dropped. Something moved outside. It wasn't a trick of light this time. A shadow shifted just beyond the glow of the porch light. Then, before I could process it, the zipper at the tent door started to move. The sound was so sharp and distinct in the silence that my heart nearly stopped. I sat there frozen for a second before blurting out, "Dad, knock it off. Earlier was enough." I wanted so badly for it to be him again. Another stupid joke. The zipper stopped for a second. No reply came. My friends started to stir, confused, mumbling half-asleep questions. I said louder, "Dad, get out of here, please." And then a voice came back. It wasn't my dad's. It was lower, rougher, and nothing familiar. The voice said, "How do you know it's me?" I don't think I've ever felt that kind of fear before or since. My entire body locked up, and then pure instinct took over. I grabbed both of my friends' arms and yanked them up. They didn't even ask questions. We stumbled over the blankets, crashed out of the tent, and sprinted barefoot across the yard into the house. None of us screamed this time. It was like shock had stolen our voices. I ran straight into my parents' room and woke them, shaking and gasping out what had just happened. My dad jumped out of bed so fast it scared me. He threw on shoes and rushed outside. I heard him shouting something into the dark, then his voice calling for someone to show themselves. My mom stayed with us, trying to calm us down. After a few minutes, I saw red and blue lights flashing through the windows. My dad was outside with the police for what felt like forever, but it was probably 20 minutes. When he came back inside, he looked more serious than I'd ever seen him. He told us there had been a man wandering the neighborhood that night, causing trouble. The police caught him near the edge of our property. They said he hadn't done anything beyond trespassing, but he was definitely not supposed to be there. My dad apologized again, saying he never should have scared us earlier because we hadn't believed him when something real happened. May decided she wanted to go home, so her mom came to pick her up. Audrey stayed, but neither of us was willing to go back out to the tent. My dad built us a blanket fort in the living room instead, and we stayed there until morning. None of us really slept, just laid there listening to the house creak, whispering now and then. When the sun finally came up, the whole house felt safer. My mom made pancakes and bacon, trying to make the morning feel normal again. My dad offered to set up the pool for us, and we spent the day swimming, trying to shake off what had happened. We didn't talk much about it, but we didn't need to. We all knew it wasn't something we'd forget. I never camped in my backyard again after that night. Audrey and I are still friends today, but to this day, neither of us has been able to get excited about the idea of camping. What was supposed to be a simple sleepover ended up being a night where we learned how quickly something fun could turn terrifying. And even now, when I think about it, I can still hear that voice asking me, "How do you know it's me?" There is a reason why I have to be talked into camping every single time it comes up in conversation. Friends, family, it doesn't matter who suggests it. I always find myself hesitating. I don't hate the outdoors, and I don't have a problem with nature itself. I just like sleeping in a bed with 4 solid walls around me, and not on the ground inside a thin tent where every sound feels like it's inches away. I'm the type of person who hears one stick snap outside and stays awake the whole night. That's just how I am. But this particular year, my boyfriend wore me down. He promised me it wasn't really camping, not in the way I usually pictured it. We wouldn't be in a tent, and I wouldn't have to try to sleep on the dirt. He told me we would be staying in a cabin, a real bed, 4 walls, a door that locked. That's the only reason I agreed. I had pushed for a trip to the ocean instead, but I finally gave in because I thought, how bad could a cabin be? The trip included the 2 of us and 2 other couples we were close with. 6 of us total. We found a cabin online that seemed perfect. It was tucked away in the woods, not completely isolated but far enough that it felt private. A lake was only about 100 yards away, close enough to walk to whenever we wanted. When we finally got there, I had to admit it was beautiful. The cabin itself was old but sturdy, with wood-paneled walls inside and a wide front porch with 2 rocking chairs. You could hear the lake faintly when the wind shifted. The first day went better than I expected. We unpacked, explored the trails a little, swam in the lake, and spent the evening grilling steaks on the porch. The air smelled like smoke and pine needles, and for the first time I thought maybe this trip wouldn't be so bad. Everyone was laughing, eating, talking. When the sun went down, we retreated inside. It felt comforting knowing there were walls around me. That first night, though, I barely slept. I kept hearing noises outside, branches breaking, leaves crunching. I told myself it was just the woods. Squirrels, raccoons, maybe a deer wandering through. Nothing unusual. But every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was listening too hard for something else. By morning, I was exhausted. The next day, we were all outside getting ready to hike one of the trails. That's when we heard a man's voice call out from behind us. It was loud, cheerful, almost too cheerful. He said hello in this booming way, like we were old friends he was happy to run into. My boyfriend, being the social type, greeted him right back. The man introduced himself as Wayne. He said he knew all the trails around here and wanted to make sure we were settling in fine. Wayne was big, tall, heavy-set, with a gut that hung over his belt. He wore jeans, boots, and had a backpack strapped on. He looked like a local who knew the area, and there wasn't anything about him that immediately screamed danger. Still, there was something off. His grin was a little too wide, and his laugh was this booming, jolly sound that didn't match the stillness of the forest. But he seemed harmless enough, so we just thanked him. He walked off down a trail, his heavy steps fading into the woods. We laughed about him once we started hiking, joking about how strange it was to just appear like that. But no one dwelled on it. By afternoon, we decided to go back to the lake. The water was calm, and we stretched out on the dock, letting the sun dry our skin. That's when we heard it again, Wayne's voice. There they are. We all jumped, hearts pounding, because he seemed to come out of nowhere. He was standing just beyond the trees, staring at us. He said he was just wandering by again. My boyfriend started talking to him casually, but I could see the other couple's boyfriend watching Wayne carefully. Something about the way Wayne stood there, grinning and nodding, looking around as if checking every corner, felt off. When he finally walked away, he kept repeating the word, "Okay," under his breath like he was talking to himself. That night, we built a campfire in the fire pit outside the cabin. The air was cool, and someone suggested telling scary stories. I couldn't shake the uneasiness that had been building since the lake. The fire crackled, and the forest beyond the light looked darker than it had all day. Suddenly, someone burst out of the bushes yelling. It was Wayne. He shouted, "Here I am," in a loud, almost playful tone, then laughed like it was all a big joke. Every single one of us jumped. My boyfriend snapped, yelling at him that it wasn't funny and that he needed to leave us alone. Wayne's face changed. He looked wounded, like a kid who had been scolded too harshly. He mumbled about just wanting to make our trip memorable and walked away down a trail, disappearing into the dark. We tried to settle back into the fire, but the mood was ruined. We cleaned up earlier than usual and went inside. Before bed, I told my boyfriend I had a bad feeling. I couldn't stop thinking about the noises I heard the night before. What if it had been Wayne then too? My boyfriend brushed it off at first, but when we got into bed, I stayed wide awake listening. Hours passed. At some point, I heard it clearly, breathing. Slow, steady breathing just outside the cabin wall. Then footsteps. I shook my boyfriend awake. He was irritated until he looked out the window. I saw his face drain of color. He whispered that it was Wayne. I pulled myself to the window. Wayne was outside pacing back and forth, his head hanging low. He was talking to himself, words spilling out but not clear. Every so often he would stop, press his hands against the cabin wall, then back away. He tried the door handle once. When it didn't open, he started hitting his head with his palm over and over like he was angry with himself. Then, after pacing for what felt like forever, he disappeared into the trees. We didn't sleep after that. My boyfriend called the cabin owner, who told us to call the police. A patrol car arrived, lights flashing through the trees. We explained everything, the first meeting, the lake, the campfire, and finally him trying to get into the cabin. The officer listened but didn't seem to share the urgency we felt. He nodded, wrote some things down, and said they'd look into it. We packed our things right then, making coffee just to stay awake until daylight. As soon as the sky lightened, we loaded the van and pulled out. I watched the cabin shrink in the rearview mirror with a sense of relief. But as we reached the main road, we saw him. Wayne was walking along the shoulder, muttering to himself, occasionally smacking his forehead with the heel of his hand. We called the dispatcher to report where we had seen him, but that was the end of it on our side. I don't know if the police ever caught up with him or if he disappeared back into the woods. Maybe he really did live nearby. Maybe he didn't. I try not to think too hard about what his real intentions were, but I know they weren't harmless. I was grateful nothing worse happened, but the thought of him pacing outside the cabin still gets to me. Knowing he was just feet away, watching, waiting for a chance, it makes my stomach twist even now. From that trip forward, I decided I was done. Everyone else can camp without me. I don't care if it's a tent or a cabin. I've seen enough to know that sleeping out there isn't for me. A locked door in a city, neighbors on the other side of the wall, the noise of traffic. I'll take all of that over the silence of the woods and a stranger named Wayne. So I'm writing this while everything is still fresh in my mind, only hours after it happened. I don't think I've ever had my nerves rattled this badly before, and even though I keep telling myself I'm safe now, I still keep looking over my shoulder. It's one thing to read about strange people on the side of the road, but it's another thing to actually stand there with one in front of you in the middle of the night, with your wife and kids asleep just feet away. My hands are still trembling as I type this out, and the weight of what could have happened is sinking in more and more. This trip was supposed to be a big deal for us. My wife and I have gone camping for years, but we'd always left the kids behind with family because we thought they were too young for the long drives and rough nights. Now that they're old enough, we wanted to bring them along for a full week away. They'd been excited for weeks, asking about the campfires, the hikes, the chance to sleep out under the stars. It was a big deal to them and to us too. So after a busy day of packing, we loaded up the truck late at night and hit the road for the 7-hour drive. For the first hour or so, the kids were buzzing, singing along to music, arguing over snacks, laughing. My wife joined in for a while, but before long everyone started nodding off. By the time I was a couple hours in, the truck was silent except for the hum of the tires and the audiobook I had on low. It gave me time to think and just push through the miles. I remember checking the mirror often and seeing all of them leaning against pillows, out cold. It almost felt peaceful. That peace ended when the truck jolted. At first, I thought it was just the road surface, but then the steering wheel jerked hard, and I felt the telltale thump, a flat. I swore under my breath and guided the truck over to the shoulder. Luckily, it was a quiet stretch of road. Not much traffic, just the occasional pair of headlights way in the distance. My family didn't even stir. Somehow, they all slept through me swerving onto the gravel shoulder. I got out, the cool air waking me up even more. The flat wasn't subtle, the tire was shredded. I popped the back and started digging through the mountain of camping gear to get to the spare. It was buried under duffels, coolers, and folded tents, but I eventually got it free. The whole time, I had this nagging thought in my head. I didn't hit anything. No pothole, no debris that I saw. It was just fine 1 minute and ruined the next. Changing a tire isn't new to me, so I set to it quickly. The truck sat on the jack, the old tire rolled to the side, and I was bolting on the spare. That's when I heard it. A soft, almost polite sound. Someone clearing their throat. At first, I thought maybe my wife had woken up and stepped out. But when I turned, I froze. A woman stood a few feet from me, just at the edge of the light spilling out from the truck's interior. She was small, wiry, with matted dreadlocks and a tattoo of a rose blooming right from the middle of her throat. She smiled faintly and said her name was Summer, asking if I needed help. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but her sudden appearance in that dark stretch of road unsettled me instantly. I managed a polite no thanks, telling her I had it under control, but she didn't leave. She kept standing there, shifting her weight, glancing repeatedly toward the dark ditch beside the road as if checking in with someone. Each time I tried to follow her gaze, I saw nothing, but the hairs on my arms stood up. She kept offering over and over in that same light tone. I just wanted to finish and get out of there. I told her again that we were fine. I packed my tools back into the truck bed, trying not to turn my back on her. That's when her voice shifted. It wasn't soft anymore. It snapped sharp, filled with an edge I didn't like. She said I really needed her help. Then she repeated it, harsher, almost like a demand. I told her firmly to back off, warning her that my family was in the truck and that I wasn't playing games. I even threatened to call the police. She didn't flinch. Instead, she laughed. A strange, dry laugh that made the night feel heavier. I turned away, deciding I'd had enough. I opened the driver's door, tossed the keys into the cup holder so I could start the engine quick, and then bent down to grab the lug wrench I had left near the tire. When I turned back, she was already swinging. The same lug wrench I had been using to fix the tire was in her hands now, raised clumsily but with enough force behind it to do serious damage. By pure instinct, I got my arm up and caught the blow awkwardly. The pain shot through my hand, but I didn't let go. I lashed out with my leg, kicking at her knees and shins. She stumbled, went down on one hand, and started grunting in this low, animalistic way. Then, without another word, she scrambled up and bolted into the dark ditch she had been staring toward earlier. I didn't stick around to see if anyone else was there. I grabbed what was left of my tools, threw myself into the driver's seat, and started the engine in one motion. My heart was hammering. I floored it back onto the road, headlights cutting through the empty stretch ahead, checking the mirrors every few seconds. For the remaining 30 minutes of the drive, I kept expecting headlights to appear behind me or for someone to step out in front of the truck. But nothing did. When we pulled into the campground, dawn was just starting to gray the sky. My wife finally stirred awake, stretching and asking where we were. I told her everything. She was furious I hadn't called the police right away, and honestly, she was right. She called as soon as we had enough signal and gave them the whole description. The rose tattoo, the name, the stretch of road. Now, sitting here at the campsite, the fire smoldering low and the kids chasing each other nearby, I can't shake the thought that she knew exactly what she was doing. Maybe she had something to do with the flat. Maybe she was waiting with someone else in the ditch. Maybe she was trying to rob us, or worse. The fact that she came at me with a wrench without hesitation keeps looping in my mind. The police said they'd check the area, but that doesn't stop me from scanning the tree line every time I hear a branch snap. She saw all the gear packed into the truck. She knows we're camping. That thought alone is enough to make my skin crawl. I don't know if she wanted the truck, the supplies, or if she was just out of her mind. What I do know is that she was real and she was dangerous. For now, I'm just trying to keep my family safe, but I can't shake the feeling that this trip almost ended before it even began. All I can hope is that was the last time I'll ever see that woman with the rose tattoo. If she was smart, she'll move on. If not, then I'll be ready. About 5 years ago, my wife and I took a trip to Colorado. I don't know how she always does it, but she managed to find this incredible spot for us to camp. I've never been good at choosing destinations. I usually end up wasting hours searching and second-guessing myself. So it's one of those things about her that I've always loved. She has a way of putting everything together, making it look easy, while I'm just grateful to be along for the ride. She had planned for us to stay 5 nights, and the place allowed us to set up camp pretty much anywhere we wanted within a huge open area. I drove our truck down a dirt road until we found a flat stretch that overlooked the mountains, the kind of spot that instantly feels like the right choice. We set up the tent, hauled out the cooler, got the small grill going, and even had some music playing. It was exactly what I'd pictured when she first pitched the idea of this trip. Just the two of us, no one else around, nothing but wilderness and quiet nights under the stars. The first couple of days were perfect. We hiked, cooked simple meals, and sat by the fire until we got tired. During the day, the sun was strong, but the air was dry and crisp. At night, the sky was so open that every star looked close enough to reach out and grab. It was different from the camping I grew up with on the East Coast. Back there, camping meant thick trees, damp ground, lakes, and mosquitoes that never left you alone. Colorado was a different kind of wilderness. Mountains rising in every direction, strange desert plants scattered around, stretches of sand and rock instead of moss and mud. It felt wild in a way that was new to me, and I liked it. The best part was that we didn't see a single person the entire time. 3 days went by without hearing a car or another voice. Some people might have thought that was unsettling, but for us it was exactly what we wanted. The third night started like the others. We were more worn out than usual because we had pushed ourselves on the trails earlier that day, climbing higher than we had before. Our legs were sore, and we were both quiet as we cooked dinner and sat by the fire. By the time we put out the flames and crawled into the tent, it wasn't even 10 yet. I fell asleep almost right away, the kind of heavy sleep that only comes after hiking all day. Somewhere in the middle of the night, I woke to my wife shaking me. At first, I thought she was just cold or uncomfortable, but then I saw her holding a finger to her lips, telling me to stay quiet. She pointed outside the tent. I didn't hear anything at first. My half-asleep brain thought maybe she had gotten spooked by the sounds of the wind or maybe a branch brushing the side of the tent. I leaned in closer, and she mouthed the words, "I think there's an animal out there." I almost laughed. I was thinking how cute it was that she was afraid, but I realized how stupid that thought was the second it crossed my mind. We were in Colorado. There were plenty of animals out here that could tear us apart if they wanted to. I kept quiet and tried harder to listen. At first, it was nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. Then, after a few seconds, I heard it. A low, strange growl. It wasn't like the growl of a bear or even a mountain lion. Those sounds are deep, guttural, the kind that vibrates in your chest. This sound was different. Thin, weak, almost forced, like something trying to imitate a growl but not quite getting it right. It sent a chill down my spine because it didn't sound natural. I thought maybe it was a sick animal, maybe something rabid. That was all I could think about. How an animal with rabies doesn't act normal and can be dangerous in ways you don't expect. The footsteps outside the tent were light. That gave me some relief because it meant it wasn't a bear. It sounded small, like a coyote. Still, I didn't want to take chances. We stayed frozen in place, listening as it circled, then moved off a little into the darkness. I whispered to my wife that we should make a run for the truck. I moved slowly, unzipping the tent as quietly as I could. When it was open, we paused. Nothing was there. The silence was heavier than before. We made a quick jog to the truck, jumped inside, and locked the doors. Inside the cab, the world felt safer, but not by much. We peered through the tinted windows, waiting for movement, straining our eyes. Minutes passed. The sound didn't return, and there was no sign of anything moving through the brush. For a moment, I wondered if we had overreacted. Then I heard it again. That same low, strange growl. Only this time I could see what was making it. It wasn't an animal. It was a man. He came into the edge of our headlights, hunched over, his arms hanging loose, his long hair swinging around his face. He had a beard that looked unkempt and dirty. Every few steps he would make that awful growling sound, like he was playing a role, pretending to be something he wasn't. I froze in shock. My first instinct was anger. I wanted to jump out of the truck and demand to know what he thought he was doing creeping around our camp like that. But before I could even open the door, I saw more movement. 3 other men appeared from the darkness. They came from the direction of our tent, laughing in low voices, whispering things to each other that I couldn't make out. They looked just as ragged, clothes dirty and torn, hair matted. 3 of them were holding what looked like large sticks, but the way they carried them made me think they weren't just sticks, they were clubs, crude weapons. One of them, without hesitation, raised his stick high and swung it down on the roof of our tent. The crash of the impact was loud in the quiet night, and I knew instantly what they thought, that we were still in there. The rage that had been building in me was replaced by raw fear. I didn't stop to think. I turned the key, fired up the engine, and slammed my foot down on the gas. The truck roared to life and lurched forward. I didn't care if I left everything behind. Our tent, our gear, the carefully chosen spot my wife had found. It all stayed there. All I could think about was getting away. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see their faces or what they would do next. The dirt road was rough, but I pushed the truck as hard as I could, bouncing over rocks and ruts, headlights slicing through the dark. My wife held onto the dashboard, her other hand shaking as she dialed on her phone. For a long stretch, we had no service. The only sounds were the engine and the rattling of the truck as we sped away from camp. Finally, miles down the road, her phone connected. She got through to someone, maybe the police, maybe park rangers, I don't remember exactly. She explained everything while I kept driving, not slowing down until the road finally met the highway. We never went back for our things. The park eventually charged us a fee for leaving gear behind and cutting our reservation short, but at that point it felt meaningless. A small price to pay compared to what might have happened if we had stayed. Law enforcement followed up with my wife a few times, but nothing ever came of it as far as we know. Maybe those men moved on. Maybe they're still out there somewhere, roaming the mountains and waiting for the next campsite they stumble across. I think about that sometimes, about how different things could have gone if we hadn't made it to the truck in time. We had planned 5 nights in the wilderness, and we only made it 3. 3 days of beauty, quiet, and peace. Then one night that made me swear I'd never take safety for granted again. I don't scare easily, but when I look back on that trip, I know we were lucky. Lucky that my wife woke me when she did. Lucky that we didn't hesitate when we heard those sounds. And lucky that we had the truck close enough to reach before those men realized we were gone. The mountains in Colorado are still beautiful in my memory, but I'll never camp there again. Some things you don't forget, and some chances aren't worth taking twice. A lot of people say the city is dangerous, full of strangers and crime, but after what happened to me and my friends in the woods last year, I will take the city over the wilderness any day. At least in the city, there are people around, lights on at night, and help is never too far away. In the woods, you are alone, and if something goes wrong, you don't have anyone to rely on but yourself. The whole trip started because one of my closest friends had just gone through a rough breakup. She had been with her fiancé for about 7 years, and when things ended, it left her shaken and unsure of herself. She was not handling it well, which was understandable. Our other friend, who loves the outdoors, thought a little trip into nature would help clear her mind. Her idea was that a night away from everything, away from the noise and constant reminders of the city, would give her space to breathe. Surprisingly, our heartbroken friend agreed, even though I knew deep down that camping was not her kind of thing. We ended up booking a small cottage deep in the woods. It wasn't a rough tent camping situation, which made it a little more appealing for me and definitely more comfortable for her. It was one of those single-room places, old and tucked away, with wooden walls that smelled like pine and must. At first, it seemed like a peaceful idea. We packed light, some snacks, some wine, a few blankets, and figured it would be a short but nice escape. I was even a little excited. I thought a night with my friends, without the usual routine of city bars or dressing up, would be refreshing. But the second we got there, I could tell it wasn't going to go the way our outdoorsy friend imagined. The cottage was small and charming at first glance, but there wasn't much to do. No television, no internet, no cell service. You could hear the creaks in the floorboards with every step, and when the wind moved through the trees, the whole place felt like it was shifting with it. My recently separated friend grew restless within an hour. She sat scrolling through her phone, frustrated at the lack of service, until she finally decided to look up local places in the area. She managed to find a bar in a small nearby town, the kind of dive place that still shows up on outdated maps. She begged us to go, and since we didn't have much else to do, we agreed. That bar ended up being the liveliest part of the night. It wasn't crowded at all, mostly just a handful of locals sitting in silence with drinks. The floor was sticky, the air smelled of stale cigarettes and beer, and the lighting was dim enough to hide most of the cracked paint on the walls. But compared to sitting in that silent cottage, it was almost fun. My heartbroken friend immediately struck up a conversation with a man at the bar. He was older, maybe in his 40s, but he had that rugged look, graying stubble, strong shoulders, a weathered face from years of working outside. Whether it was the alcohol she had already had, or just her wanting to feel wanted after her breakup, she clung to his attention. They talked for most of the night while my other friend and I sipped our drinks, watching. I felt uneasy about it, but I didn't say much. Eventually, she pulled herself away from him, laughing and brushing it off as nothing serious, and we decided it was time to head back. On the drive back through those dark, narrow forest roads, we teased her a little about her bar friend, but she just waved us off, saying it was no big deal. We got back just before midnight. The silence of the woods was overwhelming after the dim noise of the bar. We poured ourselves one glass of wine each, but none of us were in the mood to drink much. By 1 a.m, we were ready to sleep. Since the cottage was so small, we decided to stay together in the main room instead of scattering off. One of us took the couch, another the love seat, and I ended up in the recliner. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but I didn't care. The night was quiet, and soon, the three of us drifted off. At some point after 3, I felt someone nudging me. It was my friend from the love seat, her face pale in the glow of the moonlight that managed to sneak through the curtains. She whispered that she heard the doorknob moving. At first, I laughed it off, thinking she was dreaming or just nervous in the silence. But then I heard it myself. The sound was subtle at first, but then stronger, like someone was twisting it with force. Whoever was outside wasn't just brushing against it. They were trying to open the door. All of us froze. Nobody wanted to move. We pressed against each other on the couch and recliner, holding the blanket up as if that thin fabric could somehow protect us. The rattling stopped, and for a moment I thought maybe it was just an animal. But then, we heard footsteps crunching around the side of the cottage. They were slow and deliberate, the sound of shoes crushing twigs and leaves one step at a time. It's hard to describe the feeling of sitting there in silence, knowing someone is walking around just outside the wall behind you. The cottage was so small you could practically hear the weight shift from one foot to another. The steps circled until they reached the large window just behind the couch where we were huddled. That's when we heard the faint scrape, like fingers or a hand brushing against the glass. The curtain shifted, and then came the unmistakable sound of the latch being tested. Something inside me snapped, and I found myself yelling out that I was calling the police. For a moment, everything went silent. No movement, no footsteps, nothing. Then came a sound that turned my stomach cold. A voice, low and rough, whispering my friend's name. The same friend who had been flirting with the man at the bar. That was when it all connected in my mind. He had followed us. He had either trailed our car or already knew enough to track us down here. The realization made my chest tighten. I yanked open the curtain, maybe out of instinct, maybe just to face whatever was there. And sure enough, standing inches from the glass, was the same man from the bar. His eyes went wide at the sight of me, like a deer caught in headlights. He raised his hands as if to show he wasn't dangerous, but the fact that he had followed us here at all proved otherwise. For a few seconds, he just stood there, then suddenly turned and ran. I watched him vanish into the darkness. I didn't hear a car start, and I didn't see headlights through the trees. It felt like he had just melted into the woods. We called the police immediately, our voices shaking as we tried to explain. An officer came out and searched around, but there wasn't much they could do. They told us to lock the windows and doors, then left. We didn't sleep again. We sat huddled in silence until the first sign of daylight, and the moment the sun rose, we packed up our things and left. On the drive home, everything began to sink in. We had gotten back to the cottage before midnight, which meant that man had been out there in the dark for at least 3 hours, maybe more, waiting and watching. He must have followed us all the way back from the bar, parked somewhere, and sat there in the woods until he thought we were asleep. The idea of him standing outside that whole time, listening for movement inside, waiting for the right moment to break in, still makes me sick. Later, when we talked about it, we realized just how close it had come to something much worse. One of the windows in the back had been unlocked. If he had kept trying, or if we had stayed silent instead of yelling, he could have slipped in without us even hearing him. We could have woken up with him standing over us, and the thought of that is something I still can't shake. The trip didn't turn out the way our outdoorsy friend had planned, but in a strange way, it ended up helping our recently separated friend. She admitted later that the fear she felt that night forced her to realize how much she still had to lose and how badly she wanted to move forward with her life. It gave her a new sense of strength, knowing she had made it through something terrifying and come out okay. As for me, I don't look at the woods the same way anymore. When I think of the wilderness, I don't picture peace or quiet. I picture that man's face in the window, the sound of footsteps circling us in the dark, and the knowledge that danger doesn't always come from wild animals or ghost stories. Sometimes it's just another person who decided you were worth following. And after that night, I would take the chaos of the city over that kind of silence any day. I can't believe the story is over 10 years old now. Time really does move fast when you're not paying attention. Out of all the strange things that have ever happened to me, this one is still at the top of the list. It scared me then, and even now when I think back on it, my stomach turns a little. I was in my early 20s at the time, just starting to date the woman who would eventually become my wife. Back then, though, we were still new and trying to find time for each other. The problem was that both of us still lived at home with our parents, and neither of us had much privacy. Between her school schedule, work, and her friends, I felt like I was always getting pushed to the side. I was young and insecure, and in those early weeks of dating, it was starting to frustrate me. I wanted alone time with her more than anything, but it felt impossible to get. That weekend, I told her how I was feeling, and she explained that she had already made plans for a camping trip with some of her friends. She apologized but said there was no way she could cancel. At that moment, I was so upset I nearly ended things right then. But a couple hours later, after she had already left for the trip, she sent me a text saying her friends said I could come along if I wanted. I've always hated camping. The bugs, the sleeping on the ground, the bathroom situation. It's not my thing. But I wasn't about to pass up a chance to see her, so I grabbed my bag, tossed in some random things, and drove the 40 minutes out to the site. The campground itself was strange to me. It wasn't tucked away deep in the forest like I imagined camping would be. It was a big clearing with rows of tents and fire pits, with trails spidering out into the woods in every direction. It felt more like an organized summer camp than real camping. When I got there, I met her friends for the first time. They were all very different from her, loud, outgoing, and funny. I liked them right away, even though I felt like the outsider tagging along. As the evening went on, we grilled food, drank out of disguised containers since alcohol wasn't technically allowed, and played cards. The sun went down, and the campground started to feel a little more like the camping I pictured. The smell of smoke from all the fires, the cool night air, the flicker of flashlights moving around in the dark. Around 11, two people walked into our area shining flashlights right in our faces. They wore uniforms that looked official, though I couldn't tell if they were rangers or just campground staff. Their tone wasn't friendly at all. They barked at us about a strict 10 o'clock curfew and told us that all lights and noise had to stop immediately. One of the guys in our group pushed back, saying he had paid for the site and wasn't about to be told when to go to bed like a kid. The woman in uniform snapped at him, saying if we didn't follow the rules, we'd be thrown out. It was ridiculous. Grown adults being ordered to bed like it was school camp. But we were stuck. Most of us had been drinking, so leaving wasn't an option, and none of us wanted to risk actually being kicked out. So we shut everything down and crawled into our tents. Most of the group drifted off pretty quickly, but I stayed up with my girlfriend. We whispered and laughed quietly, finally getting that bit of alone time I had been craving. After a while, she leaned over and suggested we sneak out onto one of the trails where we could be alone without worrying about the rangers. At that age, I didn't need to be told twice. We carefully slipped out of the tent and crept away from the campground until we reached one of the darker trails. The woods were quiet except for the sound of crickets and the occasional snap of a branch under our shoes. We walked until the glow of the campground fires was gone, leaving us in the dark with just the narrow path in front of us. For a while, it felt exciting, sneaking around, holding hands, finally having a bit of privacy. Then everything changed. Somewhere up the trail, a man's voice cut through the dark. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to make both of us freeze where we stood. He said one word, "Hey," just like that. I thought at first it had to be a ranger who'd caught us, but something about the tone didn't sound right. Then the voice came again, deeper this time. "I know you're here. I just want to say hi." We stood perfectly still. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might shake leaves off the branches. I slowly peeked around a tree. In the dim light, I saw him, a man standing in the middle of the trail. He wasn't dressed like any ranger. He was short, wearing an oversized white t-shirt that hung loosely on him. The beam of a small flashlight shook in his hand. The second I made eye contact with him, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was stiff, stretched too wide. He lifted his other hand like he was offering something and said, "Hey, buddy, I got something for you." I didn't say a word. I just stared at him. Then he went on rambling, saying he had money in his pocket, that his ex-wife was going to take it, so he wanted to give it away before she could get it. His hand was still empty, held out as if he were offering something invisible. He was maybe 20 feet away. I turned to my girlfriend and mouthed the word "run." She took off first, and I was right behind her. As I started to move, the man lunged forward a step and shouted something that sounded like, "No!" But I didn't stick around to find out. We ran through the dark as fast as we could, branches scratching at our arms, roots trying to trip us. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop until the lights of the campground came back into view. We ducked into our tent and sat there, breathing hard, trying to listen for any sound of him following us. There was nothing. After about an hour, I saw the same staff members doing their rounds with flashlights. I pulled the woman aside and told her I'd seen a man out on the trail. I didn't admit we'd been sneaking out, just said I'd spotted him from the tent. She believed me right away and said she'd notify the police. The rest of the night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the tent, staring at the dark outline of the trees, waiting to see that man's figure appear again. He never did. The authorities came and searched, but as far as I know, they never found anyone. That was the last time I ever went camping with my girlfriend's friends. To this day, I don't know what that man wanted. Maybe he was just unstable, maybe he was dangerous, maybe both. But I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he saw us run. It wasn't disappointment. It was more like he was angry we'd ruined something he had planned. Every year, when camping season comes around and people start packing up their gear, I think back to that night. I'm grateful that we were far enough away to run, that we didn't freeze or hesitate, and that nothing worse happened. I don't need ghosts or monsters to scare me. The woods can be terrifying enough when you stumble across the wrong person in the dark. A few years ago, back when my wife was still just my girlfriend, we decided to take an unplanned camping trip. At that point in my life, I didn't have much camping experience. I had only gone a handful of times with a friend, and to be honest, it was never really my thing. My girlfriend, on the other hand, grew up doing it all the time with her family. She loved it, and she thought it would be a good way for us to spend some quiet time together away from the city. I agreed because I knew it meant a lot to her, and I figured it would be nice to try something different. She went all out preparing for it. She bought a bunch of new gear, including a big tent that was meant for 2 people but still had plenty of room to stretch out. I didn't complain about that because at the time I was a bigger guy, and more space meant more comfort. The tent had a little window built into it, which I thought was the best part. I had never used one like that before. It seemed comforting to be able to look outside at night and let the light come in when the sun rose. We arrived at this quiet spot in the afternoon. It was more isolated than I expected. The dirt road getting in wasn't marked, and there were no other campers around. The air was clean and cool, the kind of place you picture when you think of being away from everything. We were only staying 2 nights, so we figured we'd take it slow and make the most of it. The first day was simple. We set up the tent, unpacked, ate a little food, and called it an early night. That first night, I lay in my sleeping bag and stared out through the small window. The stars were brighter than I'd ever seen them. No noise of cars, no city glow, just black sky and thousands of points of light. It was calm in a way that felt new to me. I fell asleep quickly, and when the sun came up the next morning, the light shining straight through the little window woke me up just like I had hoped. It almost felt like being back home in my own bed. but better. The second day was busier. We went fishing in the creek that ran not too far from our site. The water was cold, clear, and fast-moving, and we didn't catch much, but that didn't matter. We also went hiking through some of the nearby trails. Most of them were unmarked, so we didn't go too far, but the trees were tall and thick, and you could walk for a long time without seeing a single sign of people. By the time we made it back to camp, we were tired but happy. We cooked some food, sat around talking, and then crawled into the tent before it even got that late. That night is when things changed. I was lying on my back in the sleeping bag, staring out the window like before. It was quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own breathing. At first I thought I imagined it, but it looked like something moved outside. Just a shift in the dark, a shadow against the darker background. My first thought was that I was just drifting off and my eyes played tricks on me. I sat up a little, trying to focus. My girlfriend was lying next to me, but she sat up too. She didn't say anything at first, just stiffened. The way her shoulders tightened made me realize I wasn't the only one who thought something was out there. Through the little window, everything looked still again, just trees and night. But then, the strangest detail came into focus. There was someone sitting up in a tree about 30 or 40 feet away. At first, it was just the outline that made sense. A figure perched like they had been there for a while. Then the moonlight shifted through the branches enough to show the face. Or rather, the mask. It was one of those plastic masks of a president's face, the kind you find in costume stores. The person was sitting there, legs dangling, slowly swinging them back and forth like a bored kid on a swing. The motion was so casual, and that was what made it so wrong. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen another human being since we arrived. The dirt road was overgrown enough that it seemed like hardly anyone came out here. Yet there was this person, up in a tree, watching us. We sat frozen, both of us barely breathing. I couldn't even think of what to do. My girlfriend's face was pale, and I could hear her breathing quicken. I wanted to say something reassuring, but no words came out. I felt like my throat was locked shut. The masked figure just stayed there, swinging their legs. It must have been several minutes, but it felt so much longer. Then, without warning, they dropped down from the tree. I expected them to charge toward us. My heart started hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. But they didn't rush. They just landed, stood up, and started pacing, back and forth. Slow steps. The tent suddenly felt smaller than ever. Every sound seemed sharp, branches cracking under their boots, the faint brush of leaves. My girlfriend was shaking. My hands were clammy, but I forced myself to stay sitting upright, even though I wanted to crawl back into the corner of the tent and disappear. The figure stopped walking and turned toward us, standing completely still, their head aimed directly at the little tent window. Even through the mask, it felt like they were staring into my eyes. The air felt heavy. Then came the laugh. Muffled, low, but there was no mistaking it. They were laughing behind that mask. Then they lifted one hand and started waving. Not a casual wave, but a violent, exaggerated back and forth motion. The arm looked loose, like the wrist might snap from the force of it. Back and forth, back and forth. It went on until, suddenly, it just stopped. That silence after the wave was almost worse. Then came a muffled voice through the mask. 2 words, distorted and almost playful. "Bye, guys." The second those words hit, the figure turned and sprinted full speed into the woods. The sound of crashing through underbrush echoed for a while. Then it faded, leaving nothing but silence again. We didn't move. We didn't even whisper to each other. We just sat there, staring out that little window, waiting for the sound of footsteps to return. The night dragged on. I may have closed my eyes once or twice, but never for long. My girlfriend didn't sleep at all. When daylight finally came, it was like a weight lifted. We packed up in silence. There weren't any footprints I could see clearly in the dirt around the tent, but I didn't look too hard. I didn't want to. All I wanted was to get out of there. We left earlier than planned, drove the rough road back to the highway, and didn't stop until we were hours away. Neither of us talked much on the drive. It wasn't until days later that we started to really process what happened. We had no idea who that person was, why they were out there, or how long they had been watching us before we noticed. That's the part that still eats at me. They might have been sitting in that tree for minutes, or they could have been up there for hours while we sat around camp without a clue. We never saw them again. Nothing more happened, at least not directly. But the memory stuck. The mask, the laugh, the wave, the way they said goodbye. It was all burned into my mind. Since then, we've gone camping again, but only in cabins with doors that lock. It's not about being soft or overreacting. It's about knowing there are people out there who take joy in scaring strangers. Or worse, we got lucky that night. Lucky that it didn't go further. I think about it sometimes before bed, especially when I hear noises outside at night. That mask hanging in the dark, those legs swinging from the tree, and that laugh that didn't belong out there in the quiet woods. It was real, and knowing it was real is what makes it worse than anything I could ever make up.